swing now. Swing's a little bit, it's definitely more complicated because it's you moving your foot that's been involved with the stroke. Breaks it down again in trunk and pelvis, and then hip, knee, ankle. I think some of the complication is all of these things are moving, and usually there's some deficits at each one of those joints as well. One overreaching, I feel like it breaks this down into different joints, but doesn't really talk about the leg as a whole with gait training. But I feel like some leg as a whole things that you'll see, just general issues with swing phase, taking a step with this leg. When patients don't have a lot of muscle function and control, they'll throw everything into it and sling it forward in kind of an uncontrolled manner. And that's what it is. You don't want to do that. Want to grade it down, pull that activity down, tell them not to throw so much into it, because normal walking is our bodies have developed a very energy efficient way of doing it. Foot clearance is very low. Step widths and base of support is very narrow. That's always, I hate when like therapists are like, oh, patient's balance isn't good, and they're walking like, oh, well, bring your feet wider apart, like what, so I can like learn how to walk like this. It's not very normal. Like, or your toes want to drag a little bit. Well, just raise your knees up higher so I can walk around like this. Like, that's not normal either. Like, foot clearance is very low, base of support is usually very narrow. And I'll get back to that foot clearance thing in a minute, because I can harp on that a little bit more. So people throwing too much into it. I can hardly move it. I don't have great control. They throw everything into it. There's no sense of us just letting them do that over and over again, because then we're just teaching bad quality gait. And then I feel like the second big issue is just in general decreased coordination, making it go where you want it to go. So people will throw everything into it, and then just also difficulty making it take the same step length every time, the same width every time, landing in the same spot every time, the same part of your foot every time. It's kind of a whole leg activity that this doesn't really mention when it breaks down joints that you have to work on sometimes. Just coordination, lower extremity control of movement, setting up targets for it to land to make it go right where you want it to. I also mentioned before that you can actually leave your shoes on, it's fine. That will, the ability to take a step wasn't a requirement when it came to time to walk. So we can get up and walk with her without even being able to move that foot on your own, because we can move it. And a lot of times when people are moving it excessively and throwing everything into it, we back it all the way down. This is like a big neuro-effort thing, and you'll see a lot of neurotherapists back it all the way down, and you know what? We're gonna get this leg in stance in the great position to take a step with, and then when it comes time to take a step forward with your involved leg, to start off with, if you're throwing way too much in it and you can't get it forward, or it's very difficult to get it forward, or it's not coordinated, we're not even going to pick it up off the floor. It's just gonna slide it forward. So you can use furniture sliders taped to the front of a person's. Obviously you don't have anything to make your foot, you've got a shoe on carpet. That's not a very slide friendly situation. So I could get you into socks, and I'm like, this is not safe for patients to be in gripper socks, to be in non-gripper socks. But you can get them in the socks for this. You can get them furniture sliders on the tape to the front of their shoe, because I would much rather you, and everyone would much rather you just slide your foot forward with the same joint motions that usually occur at hip and knee when you're taking a step, than to throw everything in it and take a big uncoordinated step. We could you get your foot forward that way, or we could just let it slide and do like everything it normally does at the pelvis and the hip and the knee, and then that's just building back that normal pattern of movement.
Do you only put a sock or a slider on one foot, so you still have something gripping on the other?
Yeah,
Or-
so your uninvolved side doesn't have anything on it. You can take steps normally on that one. It's just your involved side. And it would just be on the front of the foot. So when you go to take a step, you're just on the slidey part of the slider and it can slide forward, and then nothing. And I've used just a sheet of paper before when I haven't had anything, taping a sheet of paper around the end of their shoe so it'll slide. Because we really want normal at all of these joints. We want normal at all of these joints, and we'll start looking at trunk and pelvis and hips and see what people do that's not normal in this when they're going into swinging phase. Trunk and pelvis, it mentions insufficient forward rotation of the pelvis. Yeah, so it may hang out back here and a person drags the foot forward. Weak abdominal muscles to bring this forward. Inclination to the sound side for foot clearance, so they may be inclined, lean over to that side to help get this foot forward. They don't have great hip flexion or dorsiflexion. Those are usually two big culprits that patients don't have great hip flexion and dorsiflexion, and they can't take a good step forward and their foot wants to drag, so lean over to the other side to be able to get it forward easily. They'll lean over to this side to help get that leg forward. Let's take the weight off of it, make it easier to move.
So kind of hike that hip a little bit.
Yeah. That goes into, mentions hips. Inadequate hip flexion is what the issue with swing phase is going to be very, very often. Inadequate hip flexion because of hemiparesis of the hip flexor muscles, or proprioception. It mentions spastic quadriceps. If your quads are very spastic, it's hard for you to just release and do a good hip flexion movement. Abdominal weakness. So those are a combination of things that are often issues after a stroke. If people are on the flaccid end of the spectrum, they have very low hip flexion strength, and that's a really necessary thing for us to walk. And it is usually in combination with what she's doing there, poor dorsiflexion ability as well. So you get dragulation and not ambulation. So what would someone do if they had no dorsiflexors weren't working and hip flexors are not working too well to get the leg up in the air and forward?
Circumduct.
They would hip hike. They would throw more knee flexion into it as well too. But you're right. Mike said the big one, they're gonna hip hike to get the foot up in the air and forward. My hip flexors aren't working, so I'm using hip hikers to get them up. All right, so what does that do to my pelvis?
Laterally tilts.
Yeah. Raising it up on this side. What's the normal thing when you take a step forward? I'm taking a step forward with my right foot. The normal thing for my pelvis to do.
To drop.
Do I?
Stay level.
Yeah, it actually drops.
Drops.
It drops. Yeah, you remember that from talking stuff. Not much, just a few degrees. I don't know. Does anyone know that?
We did that test, dance the other day about,
Yeah, what the pelvis does.
Stork test, isn't that the stork test? Where you
Oh.
bend, you bring one foot up and the other pelvis drops.
It's like the PSA.
Yeah, so that's what it's supposed to do. It's not supposed to stay 100% level when you take a step forward with this leg. It's not supposed to raise up either. It actually drops a little bit. So that's the big part of the feedback for this if somebody's on the spastic end of the spectrum or the the flaccid end of the spectrum, that you give a downward force here. And she's being bad. She's being bad. I gave her the downward force. I told her to relax. All right, you can take a step forward with this leg because that's the position you're going to be in when this happens. I was giving her this. All right, bring that foot back. I was giving her that downward pressure. That's because that's the direction her pelvis needs to go into, and telling her to just relax the knee, soften that whole leg, and then take a step. Oh, very good. She did it that time. Because to begin with, I was here, and she was still hip hiking through me. You were still hip hiking. You didn't do it that time. But the first few times, like I was pushing down, and she fought against me and still hip hiked. So I got to get you got to drop that. You got to relax that right there, and the knee, and then bring that foot forward. Good. And it takes a little bit of time. So she's stepped with her uninvolved leg. Her weight's on it. Before she takes a step, before you go into swing phase here, you got to relax that hip and knee. You got to soften them both up, or else it's going to be a. That's how we turn it off. That's how we turn the spasticity off there at the hip and knee. You got to drop it, and you got to wait, and you got to see it relax. Because when it does, and it's ready to take a step, if her knee is staying extended right there, then if you go to take a step, it's gonna be stiff. You gotta see that knee drop and then bring that foot. Who knows if that hamlet
I know.
there? All right, that was spastic U. Flaccid U, if you really don't have the hip flexors to get you forward, and you really don't have the dorsiflexion to get you forward, you're stuck. She's pretty stuck. So her option really is to drag, to just drag or throw other things into it. So with that patient, I can be here all day. Like, oh yeah, you just gotta drop that pelvis down and bring that. Nah, that doesn't work for the flaccid person. It just doesn't have that. So that's when we're sliding, and I'll let you slide as much as you can. And then a lot of the sliders have hooks on them, like on the top and the front, so the therapist can hook their foot in the slider and slide with it. But if not, she's gonna be here and she really can't go anywhere. So I'm still gonna tell you not to. We're just gonna slide it forward. And that was a bit rough, but that's okay. And stand up nice and tall on this leg and take a step forward. Good. All right, shift your weight over. We'll move the walker forward a hair. Shift your weight over that leg, and I can help you here. Slide it forward. Good. So shift your weight over to that leg. Good. Very good. Put all your weight back over on your left. Come over on it, and we'll slide this foot forward. So I can slide. I still want to maintain. I'm still not letting you throw everything into it. Still maintaining all normal game mechanics, and I've explained those to you. Let your knee bend. Let your foot slide forward. I can do it with my foot. I can do it here. I've got like hand on tibia. I'm cueing her to just lift those toes up inside your shoe. We're always working with a combination of things. She may have good toe extension but bad hip flexion. She may not have either one of them. She may have good hip flexion but no toe extension. That we're working with. Those are usually kind of fairly common combinations of things. If your foot really is really flaccid, and it still is, and I do this, yeah, that's what it's gonna look like. It's not magically gonna come up. So I've got to get a slider on you so we can advance that foot, so we can do swing phase and not do a huge lift of that foot or any excessive non-normal movement. Yeah, so I feel like with swing phase, it's kind of hard to talk about just what to do with the hip by itself, because a lot of times it's going to be either hip and an ankle. very rarely just one joint. And if it is, it's usually a distal one that is coming back last. Knee issues can be in swing phase. We're in swing phase again, so it's in the air. Inadequate knee flexion, and that can be caused by, again, the hip not being able to flex, or the foot not being able to do what it's supposed to do, or spasticity in the quadriceps. So inadequate knee flexion, the knee staying very stiff because of spasticity, and you can tell, like, okay, there's not much knee flexion going on in that. That's what we fixed as well with the downward pressure here and releasing the knee. So that was a technique for treating something at hip and knee as well. Spasticity in the hamstrings, weak knee extensors for proprioception. So another knee thing in terminal swing, you have to get this good, that full extension, that moment right there is difficult in stroke sometimes. People on the flaccid end of the spectrum to extend, at that point the leg's in front of you and you're having to extend, so it's a little bit tricky there, yeah, to get that full knee extension, to get a good step one. Strengthening the quad, give them a target to land on, getting to land on the heel. Land on the heel. Okay, moving down, that's really not too much at the knee in swing phase. The main issue is when people have spasticity in swing phase and they just have to turn it off to smoothly advance the leg, or else it's just going to be a stiff. And then flaccid end of the spectrum, a little bit of difficulty getting it out here and not just taking a short step, because it is a pretty high, like you really need pretty strong quad to, when it's out in front of you, to extend it all the way. So look for that little bit of extensor lag in terminal swing. Ankle and foot in swing phase. If it's flaccid, it's just really, it really is flaccid. So we can use a taping procedure or an AFO, or therapist walking along and scooting it forward as well. Just, all right, so lift those toes up. I mean, if it is totally flaccid, you really start to need some AFO or sliders. But if it can do a little bit, it's gonna, maybe your dorsiflexion, it can be a lot of different things. It can be 0, it can be 1, 2, 3. It can be a lot of different things. So maybe it just needs a little assistance. And in that case, I'm probably gonna provide that little assistance and not throw some other kind of, if I put a device on it that just holds it in that position, you don't have to do anything. That's not ideal. But if it never comes back, and that's the difference between you walking and not walking, then you would want that. But if it can do a little, I'm gonna help it with the rest of the way and cue you. So right here in terminal stance, boom, on it. This is for a lot of patients, this is a really hard moment. And this is like the difference, like the next millisecond is the difference sometimes between a really good, fluid, high quality walk and not. If the person right in this moment, if inside your shoe, you can just get your toes to lift up in this moment, then people can get their foot forward so much easier. But if not, if those toe extensors won't do it, then if you make them do it, then boom, you can get that foot up and it swings forward nicely. That's another kind of aspect of gait that I'm glad I remembered to come back to. It doesn't take any force at all. Right now, with your normal step length, it's probably a little bit farther forward on this leg, it doesn't take any energy or effort at all to, under normal circumstances, advance this foot forward. When we were walking and you're about to like take a step with that, when you've taken a step with this foot, this one's about to take a step forward. We don't have to think like, oh, I've got to kick my foot forward. You don't put hardly any energy into this movement at all. And you'll see patients putting way too much energy into it. And if you can get this is a huge thing, because if you can just get your toes up, a lot of it's like a pendulum movement. Your foot's already behind you. If you just get the weight off of it, there's very little actual effort to swing your leg forward. A lot of it is gravity and momentum just pulling it forward. So if they can, in this mode, get that toe to come up inside their shoe, then a lot of it's just the legs swinging forward. So work on that. That's kind of the flaccid end of the spectrum as far as the ankle foot goes in swing phase. Some people have spasticity. When it gets airborne, it wants to kick into plantar flexion, inversion, and toe flexion in swing phase. Every single swing phase, sometimes if it's a lot of spasticity. Usually people at that level they're pretty mobile too, so they won't use stopping every single step of the way and like adjusting their foot and moving it and placing it down and they take it on. They're usually walk at a pretty decent clip and decent pace. So for them, splinting is a big, is kind of the treatment, your go-to treatment here. Splinting them while they're walking, and then working on other inhibition techniques outside of gait training, but taping and using AFOs for the purpose of breaking up spasticity for these patients. It's important. Some will choose not to, and that's just the way, that's the way Granny walked. We want to give it the opportunity to get past this stage of spasticity where it goes away, and 7 minutes come back, and they regain a fluid gait. For some people, it doesn't, and that spasticity so the gait training is kind of a big hard to like boil down into like, oh, it is the way you do gait training with stroke. You don't really get that because it's all just based on whatever is going on at hip, knee, and ankle, and stance and swing, and where you have to jump in there and make sure they're walking in what is a normal gait pattern, and if they're not, correct that, and you're there to substitute for whatever muscles they don't have. Keep it all normal gait pattern. We'll go out and do stairs.